Welcome to another video on curriculum development and quality assurance. In this video, we will deal with the didactical concept constructive alignment. In the video dealing with the often cited shift from teaching to learning, we got to know two different approaches to teaching and learning. A teacher-centered approach focused on instruction and a more student-centered approach focused on construction of knowledge. In the latter, learning is seen as an active process by the student, him or herself. This understanding of learning is the core of a theory of learning that is known as constructivist didactics. Here, I cannot go into detail on different theories of learning, but for the purpose of this video, it will be sufficient if you get to know the core idea of constructivist didactics. And this idea is, if the learning process is active construction of the student, him or herself, learning must be individual and unpredictable because it lies in the person of the learner. Therefore, the didactic design of a class, or also of a bigger entity like a study program, needs to include various modes and methods of learning that give impulses for the construction of knowledge to different learner types. This is explained in detail and very well by the film Teaching, Understanding, Understanding, which you find in another playlist on our YouTube channel here. The Australian scholar John Biggs was a supporter of constructivist didactics, and around the year 2000 he developed the didactical concept of constructive alignment. He says, "Learning is the result of the constructive activity of the student. Teaching is effective when it supports those activities appropriate to achieving the curriculum objectives, thereby encouraging students to adopt a deep approach to learning." His belief was that the key to support students to learn in a sustainable way is a process of fostering learning by aligning teaching and assessment to expected learning outcomes. The basic assumption here is that the curriculum is designed in a way that the teaching and learning methods and activities and forms of assessment are aligned with the learning outcomes that are intended in the course. And students are central to the creation of learning. They must be provided with opportunities to actively select information, evaluate it, and construct their own knowledge. When expected learning outcomes, forms of assessment, teaching and learning are intentionally aligned, the outcomes of learning are improved substantially. Before we go on in this video, I would like to give you some more definitions first. I will go into detail on all of these in the course of the video. Intended learning outcomes are the qualifications we expect our students to have achieved after they have successfully attended our course. Aligning intended learning outcomes, teaching and assessment methods in a study program or a course is also known as constructive alignment. For aligning assessment and teaching methods to our intended learning outcomes, we usually think backwards. That is, we define the expected learning outcomes first and then go on designing our assessment and teaching methods. And a very helpful tool for this backward design is the so-called competence matrix. After we have set up our competence matrix, we can then go on to develop our competence-oriented module descriptions. But now let's go and become a little bit more concrete about constructive alignment and the method of backward design. When we apply the concept of constructive alignment to the development of a study program, we usually go 3 steps. First, we define our expected learning outcomes. We answer the questions, which qualification is the program aiming at? And what should our students be able to do after they have successfully finished? Et voila, we have our expected learning outcomes on study program level. Second, we define the acceptable evidence for the fact that our students have achieved the expected learning outcomes. This means we ask ourselves which method of assessment would be appropriate in order to assess if the expected learning outcomes really have been achieved. Only after I have decided which assessment methods would be appropriate to assess whether expected learning outcomes have been achieved, I start designing my study program by defining learning outcomes on course level, assessment techniques on course level, and teaching methods. And then I construct the whole structure that is the content and order of the modules in my study program. Also on course level, the concept of constructive alignment can be achieved by applying the method of backward design. We begin by clearly defining what we expect our students to be able to do at the end of our module or course. Thus, we formulate specific, clear, and realistic outcomes. We will go into more detail on how to formulate learning outcomes in one of the next videos. Then we design the course. After we are clear about our learning outcomes, we develop forms of assessment by which we can assess whether the expected learning outcomes have been achieved. Concretely, this means if one of my intended learning outcomes was, for example, that my students should be able to present their own results to a given task, a multiple choice test might not be a good choice for an assessment, because it will not show us if the student is able to present something. But to ask the student to design and hold a PowerPoint presentation on his or her result will show us whether the student has achieved the learning outcome. So the assessment should be able to show us how well a student has reached the intended learning outcomes. Only in the last step, we develop our module or course by selecting teaching and learning methods that can help the students to achieve the intended learning outcomes. Let me show you another concrete tool that can support a curriculum development process. As Quality Assurance Officer, I can use this to support the development of a study program in my university. For example, if I sit in one of these expert groups that usually design a study program. After our expert groups that develops the program has defined the qualification the curriculum is aiming at in total, the group will start structuring and ordering the different modules that each have expected learning outcomes themselves and that finally lead to the overall qualification aim the study program is aiming at. This matrix can be helpful for that. In the first line, I note down the different semesters. In the second, I write down the respective modules. In the very left column, we can note down the different competences that the students should have acquired after they have finished the study program. Please note that here, aside of subject expertise, you can also find generic competences like social competence and self-competence. Now in the expert group, of which you might be a member as a quality assurance officer, you can use this grid in order to make clear for yourselves which competence will be fostered by which module. Or seen from the other side, which modules you need in order to foster the competences which in the end will form the overall qualification aim. In this grid you can simply mark the modules that contribute or shall contribute to the development of particular competences. I think when you sit in this expert group and you need to make up your minds on how your study program should look like concretely, this can be a very helpful tool. If you are interested in learning more, feel free to read these additional resources and watch the film Teaching, Understanding, which will go much more into detail on the topics I just tackled. And the concept of constructive alignment looks very simple. Define goals, define methods that are able to show in how far the goals have been reached, design your curriculum. In practice, however, this concept is not used everywhere, and lecturers have challenges to apply it when designing their courses. Do you see any challenges in your institutions? Which ones? Or is this concept accepted and used? And what makes it successful? Feel free to write down your comments and your thoughts on this in the comment section of this video so that we can start a discussion. Thank you very much for watching. See you in one of the next videos, and I, as always, would very much appreciate if you would actively contribute to the discussion in the comment section. Goodbye.